I never used to believe in ghosts. I laughed at horror movies, shrugged off creepy stories, and told myself that the supernatural was just something humans invented to explain what they didn't understand. That changed my freshman year of college. It was the fall semester of 2017. I had just moved into a dormitory at a mid sized university in the Midwest. The building itself was old, not historic old, not charming old, just neglected. The kind of building where the paint on the walls was cracked, where the elevators made strange grinding noises, and where the hallways smelled faintly of mildew, no matter how many air fresheners the RA plugged in. My assigned room was on the fourth floor, room 417. I remember dragging my suitcase down the hall, the wheels rattling against the uneven tiles. The door to my room was closed, but a faint light shone from beneath it, meaning my roommate had already arrived. I knocked lightly before opening the door. Inside, one half of the room was neatly arranged, bed made, desk organized, even a rug on the floor. Sitting at the desk was a guy about my age, tall and thin, with dark hair that hung slightly in his eyes. He turned and gave me a small, polite smile. "You must be Ethan," he said. His voice was calm, soft. "I'm Mark." I introduced myself, shook his hand, and began unpacking my things. For the first week or so, Mark and I got along fine. He was quiet, a little reserved, but polite. He didn't party, didn't blast music, didn't bring people over late at night. Honestly, an ideal roommate. But there were small, odd things, things I ignored at first. For example, he never ate. I never once saw him with food, not in the cafeteria, not with takeout, not even a granola bar in the room. His desk drawers were empty. Another thing, he never left the room at the same time as me. If I was going to class, he'd already be sitting at the desk, reading. When I came back hours later, he'd be in the same position, almost like he hadn't moved. And at night, when I lay in bed, sometimes I'd hear him whispering. The words were too soft to make out, like he was talking to someone who wasn't there. I kept telling myself it was just quirks. Every roommate situation had its weirdness, right? But then, the first truly strange thing happened. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up thirsty. I got out of bed and reached for the water bottle on my desk. As I glanced over, I noticed Mark wasn't in his bed. The sheets were perfectly made, tucked in, as if no one had slept in them. I froze. Maybe he'd gone out, but I hadn't heard the door open, and our door was loud. The handle squeaked, and the hinge groaned, no matter how much WD-40 you sprayed on it. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On his desk, in neat handwriting, was a single line written on a sheet of notebook paper. "You shouldn't be here." At first, I thought it was a joke. Maybe Mark was pulling some kind of weird, late-night prank. But the handwriting on that paper wasn't rushed or sloppy. It was careful, deliberate, almost elegant. "You shouldn't be here." The words made my chest tighten. I set the note back down and glanced around the room. No sound, no movement, just the faint hum of the old radiator. When I finally got the courage to check the hallway, it was empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting that sickly yellow glow. Every door was shut. When I came back inside, Mark was sitting at his desk. I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't heard footsteps. He was just there, head tilted slightly, eyes focused on the book in front of him, like he'd been there the whole time. The paper was gone. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked without looking up. His voice was calm, casual, like nothing had happened. I wanted to ask him about the note, but something in me stopped. My throat went dry, and the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I mumbled something about grabbing water and crawled back into bed. That night, I didn't sleep. Over the next few days, things got worse. I began noticing that nobody else on the floor seemed to know Mark. When I mentioned him to my RA, she frowned and said, "Room 417. That's a single." I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. "I'm serious," she said. "It's been a single for years. Nobody's assigned to that room, except you." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to argue, to tell her about Mark, about his side of the room, about his books and his clothes. But the look she gave me made me shut up, like she thought I was losing it. That night, when I returned to the dorm, Mark was sitting at his desk again, reading. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone soft, almost amused. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But inside, panic was curling its way through my chest. The whispers at night grew louder. I started to recognize words. Sometimes my name. Sometimes phrases like, "Why are you still here? You need to leave. He won't let you." I tried headphones, white noise, sleeping pills. Nothing worked. The whispers always cut through, crawling under my skin, wrapping themselves around my thoughts. And then one night, I woke up to find Mark standing beside my bed. He wasn't moving. He wasn't speaking, just standing there, staring down at me in the dark. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I just lay there frozen, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. After what felt like hours, he leaned down, close enough that I could feel the cold on his breath, and whispered, "This was my room first." The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, a hallucination, sleep paralysis maybe. That would explain why I couldn't move, why my body felt locked in place. But when I checked my desk, there was something waiting for me, a folded piece of paper. On it, written in that same elegant handwriting, were 4 words: "Stop telling people." I felt sick. Classes became a blur. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. My professors noticed. My friends noticed. My eyes were bloodshot. My hands trembled when I tried to write. When one of my classmates asked if I was okay, I almost broke down right there. Instead, I told him I hadn't been sleeping well. He gave me a strange look. "You're in 417, right?" The way he said it, quiet, careful, made me stop cold. "What about it?" I asked. He hesitated, glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Someone died in that room years ago. A student named Mark." My skin went cold. I pressed for details, but he didn't know much. Just that Mark had been found dead in 417 sometime in the early 2000s. Suicide, supposedly. The university never talked about it. When I got back to the dorm, I searched online. At first, I found nothing. Then, buried in the old archives of a local newspaper, I found it. "University student found dead in residence hall." The article was short, barely a paragraph, but the name was there: Mark Harrison, room 417. That night, when I returned to the room, Mark was waiting for me. He was sitting at the desk, as usual. But this time he wasn't pretending to read. He was staring at me. His eyes were darker than before, almost black. "You shouldn't have looked," he said softly. His voice wasn't calm anymore. It was sharper, like broken glass dragged across a wooden floor. I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't open. No matter how hard I pulled, the handle wouldn't budge. My phone had no signal. The window refused to unlock. Mark stood. He was taller than I remembered. His shadow stretched unnaturally long across the floor, bending in angles that made no sense. "This is my room," he whispered again. "And you don't belong here." The lights flickered, then went out. I was swallowed by darkness. When the lights went out, the room wasn't silent. At first, there was just breathing. Not mine, heavier, ragged, right by my ear. Then came the sound of fingernails dragging across the wall, slow and deliberate. I backed into my bed, heart slamming against my ribs. My hands scrambled for my phone, for anything that could cast a little light. But when the screen finally lit up, the battery icon flashed red, and the phone shut off instantly. From across the room, Mark's voice came, low, guttural, not human anymore. "You can't leave me." The mattress dipped beside me. Something cold pressed into my shoulder, fingers, bony, icy, clutching me tight. I screamed. The overhead light snapped back on. The room was empty. My chest heaved. My sheets were drenched in sweat. But on the wall above my bed, carved deep into the plaster, were the words, "Stay." After that night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Mark wasn't just some figment of my imagination. He wasn't stress. He wasn't sleep deprivation. He was real, and he wanted me there. But why me? I started digging. I found old message boards where alumni whispered about 417. People mentioned cold spots, strange whispers, doors opening by themselves. A few claimed they had been assigned the room, but mysteriously got switched at the last minute. One post chilled me the most. "If you're in 417, don't let him talk to you. Don't answer him. Don't write back." I thought about the notes, the whispers, the conversations. My stomach twisted. Had I already gone too far? The next night, I decided I wouldn't sleep in the room. I packed a bag, grabbed my pillow, and headed down to the lounge. But when I reached the bottom of the stairs, the world shifted. Instead of the brightly lit lounge, I found myself standing in the same hallway I had just left. Same flickering light, same peeling wallpaper, same door at the end. 417. I turned back, but the stairs were gone. Every direction I walked, every corner I turned, led me back to that same hallway. That same door. Mark was waiting at the end. "You're starting to understand," he said, smiling now. His teeth looked wrong. Too sharp. Too many. "You belong here, just like me." The hallway stretched, impossibly long, pulling me toward the room like a magnet. My legs moved without me wanting them to. When I tried to fight it, his voice boomed, shaking the walls. "Stay." I don't remember how long I was trapped in that hallway. Minutes? Hours? It felt endless. My legs ached. My throat was raw from screaming, but no sound carried past those walls. Finally, I collapsed against the floor, shaking, gasping. That's when I noticed the photographs. The hallway walls were lined with them now. Old, faded black and white pictures in cracked wooden frames. Each one showed students, groups smiling outside dorm buildings, graduation photos, club events. But the more I looked, the more I realized something horrifying. In every photo, no matter the year, Mark was there. His clothes changed with the decades. His hair was styled differently, but it was him, always him. The same pale face, the same dark eyes. Sometimes he stood in the back, sometimes at the center, but always present. And in every photo, his gaze was fixed directly at me. The lights above buzzed, then burst, raining sparks. When the darkness cleared, I wasn't in the hallway anymore. I was back in room 417. Mark stood by the window, looking out over the campus. His reflection in the glass didn't match his movements. When he turned his head, his reflection stayed facing forward. I didn't want it to be you, he said softly. I forced myself to speak. What do you want from me? He turned. His smile stretched too wide. Company. I realized then that Mark hadn't just died in 417. He had been trapped in it, bound to it, and now he was binding me too. The walls trembled. My bed slid across the floor, blocking the door. The radiator hissed like a snake. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest. You're not going anywhere, Mark whispered. You already know too much. The next morning, I woke up in bed. My door was unlocked. Sunlight streamed through the window. For a moment, I convinced myself it had been another nightmare. But when I looked at my desk, I froze. A stack of photographs sat there, the same ones from the hallway. On the top photo, someone had circled my face in red ink and scrawled beneath it, in that same perfect handwriting, "You're one of us now." The moment I saw that photo, with my face circled, something inside me broke. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't stay in 417. That morning, I packed everything I owned into my suitcase and duffel bag. I didn't care if I had to sleep in my car or beg the housing office for a transfer. I was leaving. Mark didn't try to stop me. He just sat at his desk, watching. His eyes followed me, unblinking, the whole time I moved around the room. When I reached the door, my hand trembling on the knob, he finally spoke. You can't run. I yanked the door open anyway and bolted. By some miracle, I made it outside. The crisp morning air hit my lungs like a shock. My car was parked at the far end of the lot, and I didn't stop running until I reached it. My hands fumbled with the keys. When the engine roared to life, I almost cried with relief. I drove. I didn't care where. I just drove out of the city, past the farmland, onto the interstate, mile after mile until the campus was nothing but a memory in the rearview mirror. Only then did I let myself breathe. I pulled into a gas station, off the highway, parked, and leaned against the steering wheel, shaking. That's when I noticed the rearview mirror. Someone was sitting in the back seat. Mark. He was smiling. Didn't I tell you? He whispered. You can't run. I nearly crashed pulling off the road. I stumbled out of the car, heart hammering, lungs heaving. But when I opened the back door, the seat was empty, just my bags. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, stress, lack of sleep. But when I looked back at the driver's seat, my blood ran cold. On the headrest, scratched deep into the fabric, were the same 4 words, "You shouldn't be here." I booked a motel that night, far from campus, a cheap place with buzzing neon lights and stained carpets, but at least it wasn't 417. I kept the TV on for noise and eventually drifted into a restless sleep. At 3 a.m., the static of the TV grew louder. The screen flickered. In the snowy static, a face appeared. Mark's. You can't leave, he said, his voice crackling through the speakers. You belong to the room, and the room belongs to me. The screen went black. In the reflection, behind me on the bed, Mark was sitting. I stopped calling it a hallucination the night I found the hair on my pillow. I woke in a sweat at dawn, desperate for a shower after the motel TV had shown Mark's face. I turned, and there it was, a single dark curl, lying on my pillow like a small signature. I hadn't seen my own hair fall out. I hadn't been near a barber. That curl didn't belong to me. My hands shook as I picked it up. It was human hair, thick, dark. My stomach dropped because the curl smelled faintly of mildew and old pages. The smell from my dorm room, the smell of 4 to 17. That day I called my mom and lied and said I felt sick. I didn't tell her why. I didn't tell anyone the real reason I was running in circles like an animal with its paw trapped in a trap. Instead, I started researching. It started obvious: obituary databases, campus news archives, alumni forums. But then I dove deeper: construction records, maintenance logs, the old scanned ledgers the university had digitized and then left buried in an online basement. The more I dug, the more the same name reappeared: Mark Harrison. But it wasn't only one Mark. I found mentions of a Mark Harrison in 1999, then again in 1984, a Mark Harrison in a photo from 1967, another note in a student paper from 1952. Always the same dorm room number, always the same small, quiet note in a student's margin. Don't stay in 417. People wrote about pranks and urban legends, about student folklore that had become an almost temperate superstition. But tucked among those posts were darker fragments: notes from a maintenance worker who had found scratches in the plaster, an RA who swore the room hadn't been assigned in a decade, an alumnus who wrote, "I checked that room once at night. I saw him standing in the dark, looking at me like he was waiting." And then there were the legal records. One early case, a dismissed lawsuit about a student's unexplained absence that listed 417 in a footnote. Nothing cleaner than a bureaucratic coldness to make you feel the truth of it. Institutions bury secrets the same way a river buries a dead thing under silt. That evening I drove back to campus. I told myself I would talk to someone official. Housing, counseling, whatever it took. Maybe collective action could wear the thing down. Maybe names and records could clog whatever mechanism fed Mark's hold. The housing office was closed. The counseling center had evening hours, but they were booked. I wandered the campus anyway, watching the library's windows glow into dusk, seeing faces like reflections in the glass. People moved in their lives, indifferent to the way the edges of my world were dissolving. I found myself at the entrance to the dorm before I realized I'd walked there. The brick arch looked the same, a small solid thing, unchanged by whispers or decades. The front door opened with the same mechanical sigh and fluorescent glare. I hesitated on the threshold. My hands were clenched in fists. The hallway smelled like old floor wax and something sweeter, like the scent of certain old books, the smell my curl had when I held it. I climbed the stairs. I told myself I would go straight to the RA office, speak to someone rational. Instead, I found the door to 417 ajar. Mark was sitting at the desk. He smiled as if I were late for a class. Back so soon. The thing that struck me, the real strike, was that I felt tethered, not like a metaphor, but actually tethered. When I tried to turn and leave the room, an invisible line drew taut from behind my sternum, a pressure pulling me backward until my knees buckled. The world narrowed. I realized with a clarity that terrified me that whatever tether existed between Mark and this place now attached to me too. "You're not supposed to go," Mark said. "You're a part of the picture now." His voice was both gentle and deadly certain. "You noticed the photographs? You saw yourself. That's all it takes." I stumbled out, groping for air. I thought, absurdly, futilely, of ripping the room apart, of burning everything in it to ash. But I knew better by now. This thing didn't respond to force, it responded to attention and memory and presence. It was patient. It wanted me to stay. The first person I reached was a librarian, Ms. Alvarez, a woman in her 50s who'd worked on campus long enough to have keys to most of the university's hidden doors. She listened without interruption as I explained, breathless, and then shushed me like a library book when I dropped my voice to the absurd. "I've heard songs like this," she said finally, and it was a soft, exhausted sound. Folks in the archives call them mnemonics of something that refuses to die, places that remember and refuse to let go. She walked me through the back stacks and produced a thin, cloth bound volume that should have been buried in the special collections room. "We call it the Ledger of Holds," she said. "Institutional folklore. But sometimes folklore has teeth." The ledger had notes scrawled across margins in 100 different hands. "Room 417, found empty, bed made, clock stopped at 3:17 a.m. Room 417, guest removed from campus by force, family denies suicide. Room 417, maintenance found window, nailed shut from inside." One line, older, heavier ink, read differently. "Room holds its own. If you enter, you belong. If you leave, you bring it with you." When Ms. Alvarez turned on me, quietly, matter of fact, "You should have never shown the room your face. Places like that are hungry for attention. They're not hungry for bodies alone. They want memory, witness, the continuity of a life noticing them. Is there a way to end it?" I whispered. My voice was tattered. She looked at me like someone looking at the tide. "You can try to starve it of witness," she said. "Ignore everything. Stop documenting. Stop telling. Move on." But they fight that. They feed on the will to stay. Sometimes a person needs to make a sacrifice to unchain a place. Sacrifice? I wanted to laugh and then vomited instead. She did not flinch. "You can isolate the object," she said. "Shut the room down, have custodial seal it, close the file, let it sleep. Or you can try to take the memory away from it." She tapped the ledger with a bony finger. "Those are the options I've seen. Neither guarantees anything, but most are unwilling to risk it. They choose quiet, and the room continues." It sounded silly to me. A book, a line on a page, a policy. But the way she spoke made the campus seem like a living organism with places that strained when prodded. You could not chase away something woven into its bone with rationality alone. I left the library heavy with that knowledge. For a long time, I drove aimlessly and eventually pulled into a convenience store parking lot with neon making the rain-slick glass look like a postcard. At some point around 2 a.m., I could not stay awake. I slept in the car. I woke up with my hands in the glove compartment and a message, typed on a scrawl of napkin, tucked under my windshield wiper. It read simply, "If you leave it be, it grows. If you fight it, it takes you entirely." There was no signature. When I finally decided to act, it felt less like courage and more like a surrender to urgency. I contacted housing. I used the anonymous form because the ones I'd tried to talk to had smiled that thin, knowing smile, the one that carries the assumption that youth is dramatic and sleep deprivation is fashionable. "Please," I wrote, "do not assign anyone to 417. Close it. Seal it." A few hours later, during the daytime, 2 facility technicians came to my door unannounced. They were young, uniforms crisp, polite. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the doorknob and watched them enter the room for the maintenance check they requested. They hummed and made small talk over their radios as if it were a routine. Check for rodents. Report anything suspicious. The room looked innocent by daylight, a mercy of sunlight. The technicians laughed at an old poster on the wall. They folded back the bedspread and found it neat, clutches in place, no sign of recent occupancy. One of them, a kid not much older than me, stepped closer to the desk and picked up a photograph, holding it between thumb and forefinger. He chuckled, and I watched his smile curdle as the photograph warmed to his touch like a brand. He started to read the writing along the bottom. His eyes went wide. He backed away, hands trembling. This can't be. He slapped the photograph gently onto the desk and radioed the other tech. The radio crackled. We need a supervisor. We need. He never finished. They left hurriedly after that. Their eyes found me in the hall and then slid away as if with polite fear. Later that day, housing sent an email to the floor. 417 will be held out of rotation, pending inspection. Please disregard any rumor. The language was cold, bureaucratic, and final. The kind of official thing that tries to put a lid on a pot too hot for it. For a week, the room sat empty. I thought perhaps that might break the pattern. I left the campus again. I stayed away for days. I slept in cheap motels and kept my phone turned off. Everything felt quieter. For a few blessed nights, I had no whispers in my ears. I ate. I showered. I almost believed it was done. Then the photos began to arrive. They came in the mail, slid under my motel door. Crisp, glossy prints of campus life 10 years ago, and in the back of every photograph, the same handwriting, the same cadence. Welcome home. One photo caught me in the crowd at orientation, my face half turned, smiling at nothing. The back of that one simply said, Stay. I burned them in the motel sink the first night. The paper curled, blackened, and the smoke tasted like ash and iron. I should have felt relief, but as the last print blackened, I heard, soft as a lullaby, You can't leave. I thought briefly of driving off the planet. It was a ridiculous thought, but when you are cornered by something without reason, every notion that involves distance starts to sound sensible. That night, I slept for maybe an hour, and when I woke, the motel television played static, and in the corner of the screen, like a watermark, Mark was standing in a doorway, watching me. I understood then that it wasn't only the room claiming me, it was the memory of the room, the record of me having been observed there. If Mark's existence was stitched into century-year cycles of attention, my very fleeing sent a thread back to me, tethering me to a place that no longer needed my physical presence to bind me. So I came back, not because I wanted to, but because I had to understand the rules I'd broken. The universe has a habit of presenting logic, even to chaos, if you look long enough. When I stepped inside 417 this time, the door closed behind me of its own accord. The light in the hallway dimmed, like an old theater house drawing curtains. Mark was at his desk, and for the first time, something in his eyes looked almost like sorrow. You tried to leave, he said. He stood and crossed the room with an easy pace. Up close, the skin under his eyes looked stretched. No one gets off the board clean. I swallowed. What do you want from me? He smiled so small, it was almost a tear. You already know, don't you? I want company. I want my witness. I want someone to remember. I realized with a clarity that made my teeth ache that memory was the currency here. The room purchased continuity with witness, and the price was the slow erosion of the witness's life. until witness itself was merely a photograph. The idea of a severance ritual came from Alvarez's ledger. Buried in the back, half torn, was a student's note, dated 1974. If you erase your name from the record, you cut the rope. No memory, no witness, but something must remain in your place. Something must sit in the room for the ledger to hold. It sounded like madness, but it was the only thread left. I thought of fire, of tearing photographs, of smashing the desk, but the ledger made it clear. Destruction was useless. The room wasn't a physical thing. It was a continuity of names and witnesses. To sever the tie, I'd have to give it something else. A placeholder, a sacrifice. I returned one final time to 417, this time carrying three things: the hair I'd found on my pillow, my student ID, with my face frozen in that smile from orientation, a notebook full of every memory I'd recorded about Mark. The room smelled of mildew, warm and sweet. The desk lamp glowed, though I hadn't touched the switch. Mark sat as he always did, waiting. "You don't have to do this," he said. His tone wasn't threatening, it was pleading. "I do," I whispered. I set the notebook on the desk. My hands shook as I tore the ID in half and placed it on top. I laid the hair across the pages like a ribbon. "This is my record, my witness. I'm giving it to you. After tonight, I won't carry it anymore." Mark leaned forward, curious. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "And what will you carry instead?" "Nothing," I said. "That's the point." I struck a match and touched it to the notebook. Paper curled, the fire caught, the photographs, the scribbles, the ID, all blackened, the room filled with smoke. Mark didn't move. He watched, and as the flames ate the last corner, his outline began to fade. His skin seemed to peel away into static, his eyes hollowing into emptiness. "You'll forget me," he said. His voice cracked, "and when you do, I'll be gone." I nodded, choking on smoke. "That's the bargain." The last thing I saw was his face dissolving into ash, as if memory itself were burning away. Then the fire died out, leaving only silence and a desk scarred black. I woke in my own bed, not the motel, not the dorm, my bed at home, morning light through the blinds. The air smelled clean, ordinary, blessedly ordinary. There were no photographs on the floor, no whispers in my ears. The tether in my chest felt severed. For days I waited for a sign, a curl of hair, a note, a figure in static. Nothing came. The silence held. It seemed I had won. And yet, weeks later, I was walking past a bulletin board on campus when I froze. A flyer was pinned there, freshly printed: Room 417, vacant. Apply with housing. I tore it down with shaking hands. No one around me seemed to notice. Students walked by, laughing, texting, unaware. That night, I dreamed I was standing in 417 again. The desk was empty, the bed neatly made. On the desk lay a single notebook. I opened it. Inside were blank pages, hundreds of them, waiting to be filled. And on the very first page, written in handwriting that was not mine, were four words: "Someone has to stay." I woke up screaming. Now, as I write this, the last thing I will ever write about Mark, I realize what the sacrifice really meant. I erased my witness, yes. I burned my record, but I left something in its place. This story, my telling, my memory in your eyes. You are reading it now. You are noticing. And that means the room has found another witness. It was nearly midnight when Daniel left the gas station on Route 47. He had been driving for 6 hours already, trying to make it home before dawn. His eyes burned from fatigue. his hands stiff on the steering wheel. The highway stretched on endlessly, dark and empty, except for the occasional sweep of headlights from the opposite lane. That was when he saw her, a girl, maybe 19, 20 at most, walking along the shoulder in the freezing night. Her hair was long and tangled, her white dress fluttering in the cold wind. No coat, no bag, no phone in sight. Daniel slowed down, heart thumping. No one should have been out here in the middle of nowhere. He rolled down his passenger side window. Hey, you okay? Do you need a ride? The girl turned slowly. Her face was pale, almost glowing in the beam of his headlights. For a moment, she just stared at him with wide, unblinking eyes. Then she nodded. Daniel unlocked the door. She slid in silently, folding her hands in her lap. The air inside the car grew noticeably colder. For the first few miles, neither of them spoke. Daniel cleared his throat. So, where you headed? The girl's voice was soft, barely audible over the engine. Home. Where's home? She lifted one thin arm and pointed ahead, a little further down. I'll show you. Daniel tried to smile. All right. Lucky I came by, huh? Pretty late to be walking out here. The girl didn't answer. When Daniel glanced sideways, he noticed her dress was damp, clinging to her skin as though she had walked through water. Her bare feet rested lightly on the floor mat, leaving dark streaks of moisture. A chill ran through him, but he forced himself to keep driving. After 10 minutes, she finally spoke again. My parents are waiting. They'll be glad you brought me. The girl directed him off the highway and down a narrow rural road. Trees arched over the pavement, blotting out the moonlight. The further they went, the worse Daniel's nerves got. Finally, a house appeared at the end of the road. A large, weathered Victorian with peeling paint and sagging shutters. A single porch light glowed weakly. This is it, she whispered. Daniel pulled up to the curb. You want me to walk you to the door? The girl smiled faintly for the first time. That would be kind. Together, they walked up the cracked path. She moved slowly, her wet dress dragging across the grass. At the door, she turned to him. Thank you for the ride. And then she was gone, vanished. Daniel blinked, heart hammering, spinning in circles. She hadn't opened the door. She hadn't run. She had simply disappeared. He stumbled back to his car, shaking. That's when the porch light flickered on, and the front door creaked open. An old woman stood there in a nightgown, staring at him. Can I help you? The old woman's face was lined with age, eyes cloudy yet piercing. I just gave her a ride, Daniel stammered. She was on the road. I dropped her off here. The woman's gaze grew sharp. You gave who a ride? The girl, in the white dress. She was wet and barefoot. I drove her here. The woman's hand went to her mouth. She gasped, her frail body trembling. My God, she whispered. That's impossible. Impossible? What do you mean? She shuffled to the front door, beckoning him inside. Come in. You need to hear this. Daniel hesitated, but something compelled him to follow. The inside of the house smelled of old wood, dust, and faint flowers. The furniture was covered with lace cloths and old photographs in frames. She led him to a small living room. On the wall were dozens of photographs of the girl. The same girl he had just given a ride to, but all of the pictures were dated decades ago, 1970s, 1960s, even earlier. Daniel's stomach churned. She's been dead? The woman nodded. My daughter, she drowned in the creek by the highway when she was 17. That was 40 years ago. Every few years, she appears to travelers, asking for rides home. Daniel stumbled back, heart hammering. But I just saw her. The woman's voice trembled. Some things linger, child. Some souls are not ready to leave. She appears to those who will carry her story, those who will remember her. You have seen her, and now you must remember. Daniel's hands shook. He thought about the cold in the car, the wet dress, the vanish at the doorstep. Every detail came rushing back, impossible and undeniable. You must tell others, the woman continued, so they know. If she finds someone who is careless, someone cruel, she may not vanish so gently. She's harmless if respected, but the road is not safe. Daniel nodded numbly. I understand. The woman led him back to the door. Drive carefully. Remember, if you see her again, don't panic. Don't follow blindly. Offer kindness. Nothing more. That is her only request. Daniel left, hands still trembling, eyes darting to the road. As he drove back onto Route 47, he slowed whenever he saw shadows along the shoulder. Every gust of wind, every silhouette made him tense, and every so often, out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw a flash of white dress gliding along the road like a whisper. Weeks later, Daniel's memory of the first encounter remained vivid. The chill in the car, the wet hair, the pale face. He tried to convince himself it was a hallucination, but deep down, he knew better. One night, driving home from work along the same highway, he noticed something familiar, a figure standing in the moonlight, her hair tangled, her dress fluttering. His stomach dropped. He slowed down and rolled down the window. Do you need a ride? He called. The girl nodded, her face serene, almost sad. Daniel's hands gripped the wheel tightly. He realized then that the legend was true. She did not belong to the present. She was a fragment of the past, a memory walking in the flesh. This time, he didn't stop at the first house. Instead, he drove slowly, following her faint hand gestures. He didn't speak. He didn't panic. The air in the car grew colder with each mile. But he kept a steady pace, aware that the rules had changed. When she finally faded into the darkness near a bend in the road, he knew she had been satisfied. He would carry her story now, as the old woman had instructed. Daniel couldn't forget her. He told his friends, cautiously, unsure if they would believe him. Most laughed, dismissing the story as folklore. But then, months later, he read a news snippet in a local paper. Motorist reports ghostly figure along Route 47, claims to have given her a ride home. It described her dress, her wet hair, her pale face. Daniel's hands shook as he read. He was not the only one. The story had continued, unbroken across decades, each witness carefully retelling what they had seen. Some claimed she vanished entirely when they reached the house. Others reported strange cold spots in the car. A few drivers, unlucky, had near accidents after the hitchhiker appeared suddenly in headlights, only to vanish when they tried to stop. The pattern was clear. She chose kind, observant drivers, those who would respect the encounter and remember it. Her appearances were a bridge between life and death, a ghost tethered to a moment in time, seeking acknowledgement from the living. Over time, Daniel felt the subtle weight of the story he carried. Sometimes he dreamed of her. Sometimes, when driving along quiet roads late at night, he could feel the faint chill that reminded him of her presence. The road, the white dress, the cold wind. It became a permanent part of him. He could never ignore it, but he also knew he could never warn everyone he passed, nor would they believe him if he tried. Every encounter was fleeting, ephemeral. Yet every time he drove alone, he remembered her request, kindness, nothing more. And in the silence of the empty road, Daniel often wondered how many others had she chosen across generations? How many drivers, like him, were now bound to remember, to carry her story forward, to become the living witness to her tragedy? Years later, Daniel would still tell the story. The vanishing hitchhiker on Route 47, the pale girl in the white dress, the warmth of a simple act of kindness that could bridge the impossible. And while rational minds might dismiss it, Daniel could never forget the cold, wet dress, the haunting silence of the house, and the feeling of being watched by a memory not entirely of this world. He knew this much. Some ghosts do not ask for revenge. Some ghosts ask only to be seen, and when they appear on the highway in the dead of night, they are not looking for fear. They are looking for acknowledgement. When Julia moved into her new apartment, she was relieved. The old lease in her last place had ended with neighbors blasting music until 3 a.m. every night, and a landlord who never fixed the plumbing. Her new apartment was small but clean, a second-floor unit in a quiet building on the edge of town. Rent was reasonable. The landlord was polite. There were only a few neighbors, an elderly man in 3B, a young couple in 4C, and an empty unit above hers. She had signed the lease 3 days ago, but when she unlocked her door for the first time, she felt something off. The apartment smelled faintly of dust and something metallic, like old pennies. The floor creaked in ways that made her stomach twist, but she chalked it up to age. That night, as she unpacked boxes, she heard it, a soft thump above her ceiling. She froze. Probably just someone moving boxes, she reasoned. Another thump, then a scrape. The apartment above hers had been empty for months, according to the landlord. The noises continued the next night. At first, they were random thumps, scratches, even a low dragging sound. Julia tried to ignore them, telling herself it was just the building settling. By the third night, she could swear she heard footsteps pacing directly above her ceiling, moving slowly from one end of the apartment to the other. She texted her friend Mara, "I think the upstairs apartment is haunted. I keep hearing footsteps." Mara replied, "You're overthinking it. Old buildings make noises." Julia wanted to believe it, but then she started noticing other things. Objects slightly moved after she'd left the room. Small items. A coffee mug turned upside down. A pen shifted from her desk. She began recording her surroundings with her phone at night. The first recordings were mostly silence, but on the third night, she captured it. A faint voice, whispering something she couldn't understand. Over the next week, Julia's fear escalated. She avoided the living room at night, sitting only in her bedroom. The noises became more deliberate, thumps in rhythmic patterns, almost like footsteps following her around the apartment. One night, she decided to confront it. She climbed the small staircase that led to the attic hatch, hoping to peek into the ceiling space. The attic above was empty, no signs of human presence. But then she saw the writing. On the back of a ceiling beam, scratched into the wood, was a message. "I see you." Her hands shook. Her phone slipped from her grip. She ran back to her apartment, locking the door behind her. Julia installed cameras, a small security system she could monitor from her phone. She positioned them to cover the ceiling, her bedroom door, and the hallway. The first night she reviewed the footage, she saw nothing unusual until she zoomed in on the ceiling. There, faintly reflected in the corner of the lens, was a shadow. It moved slowly, inhumanly, creeping along the ceiling in a way a person shouldn't be able to. And then the voice, a whisper, clearer than before. Don't look back. Julia froze. In desperation, Julia called the landlord. He insisted no one had ever lived in the upstairs apartment since the previous tenant moved out 6 months ago. Then she noticed something even stranger. At night, she could hear not just footsteps, but the faint sound of a chair being dragged, and soft humming, the same tune, every night, like a lullaby. She asked the neighbor in 3B if they had heard anything. Oh, he said casually. Yeah, I hear it sometimes. Thought it was the new tenant moving things around. But the apartment is empty, Julia said. He shrugged. Some people hear things differently. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to sleep, but she didn't. One night, Julia woke to a scraping sound directly above her bed. She froze, heart pounding. She slowly raised her phone and turned on the flashlight. Then she saw it, a face, pale, twisted, with dark eyes staring through a crack in the ceiling. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out, just a gaping, empty shape. Julia screamed. She jumped out of bed. The face vanished instantly. Her apartment door slammed shut on its own. The lights flickered. She grabbed her coat and ran to the hallway, pounding on the doors of the neighbors. No one answered. The humming continued, soft and constant, inside her own apartment. The next day, Julia packed her bags. She contacted the landlord, demanding to break the lease immediately. He was reluctant. It's just an old building. Nothing's wrong. But Julia didn't wait. That night, she called a rideshare and left. As the car pulled away, she glanced back. The lights in her apartment flickered. The shadow of a figure appeared in the living room window, standing silently and watching her. Julia stayed with a friend across town. She tried to move on, but late at night, she would get texts from an unknown number. You can't leave. She blocked the number. They kept coming, from different numbers. Sometimes she thought she heard humming outside her window. And then one morning, she saw a car parked in front of her friend's house. A car that wasn't familiar, and in the back seat, a shadowed figure, the faint outline of a person, watching her. Through research, Julia discovered that the previous tenant above her had mysteriously disappeared. Police had investigated, but found no evidence. No fingerprints, no blood, nothing, just an empty apartment. Other residents whispered about a presence in the building, a figure that had been seen for decades, moving silently through ceilings, walls, and shadows. Every person who had lived in the building reported strange things, whispers, shadows, objects moving, and sometimes the face in the ceiling. It was as if the building itself had a mind, a consciousness that fed off the fear and attention of anyone who dared occupy the lower apartments. Julia posted her story online, a warning to anyone considering living in that building. Never stay in the bottom units. Don't investigate the noises. Never look directly at the ceiling when the noises intensify. Readers responded with their own stories, similar incidents in different cities. The legend seemed universal, an unseen presence above, feeding on curiosity and attention, leaving no one untouched. Julia never went back. She moved to a new apartment across town, and for months, she slept soundly. But sometimes, late at night, she would hear faint scraping, faint humming, as if the ceiling of her new apartment whispered, I'm still here. Some things are not meant to be seen. Some buildings remember. Some presences never leave. Julia learned the hard way that curiosity is a currency. The moment you notice the unseen, it notices you, and no matter how far you run, some things follow, patient, silent, waiting above your head in the spaces you thought were empty